Thanks again for listening in to Your Shadow Advisor, a podcast about navigating higher education from a first-generation person of color perspective. I'm your host, Professor Daryl Wanzer Serrano. So today, I'm going to be talking to you about asking questions inside class and outside of class, like in office hours. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about how to approach the process of asking questions, how to prepare for that, when to interject in class, and when to take it out to office hours and how to navigate that whole thing. I think that this is an important topic, especially for first-gen students, because I think there's an assumption, right, that we should get things when really the reality is that most of the time, especially in a doctoral program, people aren't getting things, right? And you need to ask questions in order to develop a better understanding of whatever topic you happen to be engaging. And so I want to be able to talk about basically to kind of talk up this task, right, of asking good questions, and talk a little bit about how to navigate the process for doing so. Before I do that, I want to kind of turn back to just a quick plug for the programs that we did the last 2 weeks. Both of which were on public service loan forgiveness. The first episode was focused explicitly on the temporary waiver that expires at the end of October. So for people who, like me, have been out of graduate school for a little while or out of school for a little while, but have been engaged in public service employment, now's kind of the time to act, especially if you haven't already been part of the public service loan forgiveness program. The second of those episodes was more generally about public service loan forgiveness, and so it's a great episode to listen to, even if you're currently still a student. So I just want to recommend going back, listening to those episodes if you haven't already, because I think there's a wealth of information in them, especially coming from the person I was interviewing, Christina Ceballos, who is the founder of a great community focused on public service loan forgiveness on Facebook. So check that out. Look at the show notes. There's great links to different resources, and I hope you find those episodes useful. The other thing I want to mention before we get going on today's topic is that I think really I need to kind of slow down a little bit. September has tried to murder me. I think I'm probably not alone in that feeling. Something about this semester feels like the first kind of full semester back from the COVID pandemic, even though the pandemic is of course still going on, despite what Joe Biden might say. It's just something about this semester just feels more real and more active. I think it probably has to do with the return of more on-campus events, at least here in Texas. And so I just need some more time, y'all. So I'm going to cut back. Instead of doing an episode every week, right now, I'm just going to cut back to every other week. So we're going to move into a bi-weekly format, because it's just me, and it takes a lot of work to put together the episodes, to do the editing, and to get things up online and on time. So there won't be an episode next week, but there will be something the week after. So stay tuned for that. So today, as I mentioned before, I want to talk about questions. Like I said in the opening, I think that there's an assumption that the first gen students especially have this assumption, although I think this is probably an assumption that a lot of graduate students have. But there's this assumption that you should already kind of know what it is that you're doing. You should just kind of, by your own smarts, completely understand the things that you're reading, the assignments that you're tasked with completing, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that, that this is one of those key hidden curriculum things, right? That the fact of the matter is that everyone doesn't know everything, right? And that's why we're in school. That's why we love school, right? Is we get to learn new things. And sometimes, oftentimes you need to ask questions to be able to learn those things. Now, I think that the people who aren't first gen students are kind of, I think taught the value of asking questions and being inquisitive and being present through their questions in class. And I think that first gen students aren't taught those things. So I want to talk through the process of like how to be asking good questions. And I want to start with the kind of fear that people have about asking a quote unquote dumb question. Look, here's the deal. I think for the most part, there aren't dumb questions, but I do want to give a bit of a kind of, a bit of a warning about that, a bit of a caveat about that. I think there aren't bad questions so long as you've prepared and thought through what your question actually is. And what I mean by that is that, I think the only time that I'm ever frustrated by a question as a professor is when it's a question that is obviously answered in the reading, right? And I know that there's like complex topics that are covered in readings or in assignment sheets, and that those need further questions, right? But like, if your question is, what's the definition of X, and on page 2 of the reading, the author provides a very clear definition of X, then I think we need to like think more deeply and talk more deeply about your reading skills, right? Or if you ask a question about an assignment that's literally just been answered in class, or is like very clearly answered, like objectively clearly answered in an assignment sheet, then that's a little bit frustrating, right? But like barring those exceptions, there are no bad questions, right? I think that that you have to do the work though of situating your question in the kind of particular frame of reference that you have in mind, and ask the question in a kind of precise way. And so, like, one of the things that I'm trying to get at here is that that I get frustrated if a student says just throws their hands up and says, "I'm completely lost," right? No one's ever completely lost about something. No one ever doesn't understand anything in a reading, right? Your understanding is always going to be situational, though, and you might understand, a narrower range of things from a reading than someone else, but that doesn't mean that you're completely lost, right? So you're entering the conversation, you're entering the question asking frame with some kind of understanding. And so that's always a good way, I think, to situate the question that you're asking, right? So if you understand, what the author means about X but not Y, then I think you can say, and there's a relationship between those things, I think you can say, hey, I understand what the author is arguing about X, but what I don't understand is how Y follows from that, right? So what does the author mean by Y, and how does it relate to X? So trying to like, position your questions linked to what you do already understand is a great strategy for how to approach it, and how to also, like, let's be honest, like save face and manage your kind of performance of graduate studentness. Even beyond that kind of face saving measure, though, like, I think it's important to demonstrate your thought process in an efficient and appropriate way, right? It shows your peers, it shows your professor that you have put some thought into this, and you're acknowledging kind of what you do understand, while kind of like posing a specific question about something that's related to that. So it's really kind of critical that you're specific with the questions that you ask, as specific as you can be, and that you ask them at an appropriate time in the seminar or in office hours. So how do you know when it's an appropriate time to ask a question in seminar? Well, If your question relates to a topic that is already under discussion, then that's a great time to figure out a way to kind of jump in and ask your question as a follow up to that discussion that's underway. If it's at the beginning of class, that can be another great time to ask, right as discussion is going. Most graduate seminars, in my experience, at least as a coming from a kind of like critical and cultural studies sort of field and program, most professors will ask kind of early in class after dealing with different kinds of like housekeeping issues, who wants to get conversation started, right? Maybe they'll give a little lecture first. Maybe they will just jump in because people have done different like written engagements of the reading already. And so that could be a great time to kind of jump in to get the conversation started, especially if it's a kind of like foundational issue that you have to understand before you can move on to more kind of like higher order concepts from the reading. Sometimes though, like there just isn't a good time in a seminar to ask the question. And I think you've got kind of two choices of what to do if that's the case. First is you can hold off and ask the question after class. So like go up to the professor and say, hey, it didn't seem like there was a good time for me to ask this because we'd already moved on, but here's my question about this reading or this concept or whatever. So that's one way to handle it. That can be efficient, and oftentimes professors will have a little bit of time after class to be able to do that. If they don't, right, if they're clear that like they got to run or whatever, then you need to make an appointment to ask the question. And I would do so sooner than later. Try to make an appointment for during the professor's office hours, especially if they got office hours coming up. If they don't have office hours coming up, right, maybe they were earlier in the week, so you've already missed them. Or maybe like you can't make office hours because you have another class at that time. Then I would email your professor and say, hey, I'd love to meet with you to talk about this before I do next week's reading. I can't make it to office hours because, give your valid reason. But I'd love to know your availability, know if you have availability to be able to meet later this week, right? Don't just say I'm available, today from 3 to 5 p.m. When can we meet, right? Don't make the assumption that you're entitled to meet with the professor right away. Like, leave the ball, leave the ball in their court, because every professor has kind of different ways that they like to schedule things, and they may not have been clear about what those ways of scheduling are for you. So, leave it to them to be able to ask you what your availability is on different days or different times, or maybe they're going to say, well, I've got these chunks of times available. When can you meet in those chunks of times? Or maybe they have a link to something like Calendly or Fantastical that will help you set up your own meeting in times that they have availability structured. Don't be afraid to do that, right? That's what office hours are for. That's one of the things that office hours are for. And professors love to talk with students about things. I think that's been my experience. Like, I would much rather be talking with a student about things from class than just sitting alone doing nothing in my office during office hours. Okay. I love having the chance to talk with people about about the topics that I'm teaching, because I'm passionate about those topics, right? And I think that's the case for most professors, right? They're passionate about the topics they're teaching, especially graduate courses, and eagerly await the opportunity to talk with their students about those things, because they have a vested interest, right, in ensuring that the students in their class leave their class with with kind of new levels of expertise, right, on the topics that they're engaging. The last thing I want to say about this is don't wait for big questions that need to be answered sooner than later, right? Some questions, especially about foundational readings, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, are important enough to be dealt with as soon as possible because subsequent things aren't going to make sense without them, right? And I think that most of the time, right, professors are building their graduate courses in a way that front loads some kind of broader theoretical constructs or methodological constructs that then later readings are going to rely upon in some explicit or implicit way. And so it's really important, especially early in the semester, like right now, if you're on the semester system or if you're on the quarter system, right? Maybe you just started or about to start your academic year. When you have those big questions early, get them answered because if you don't, you really risk being lost as you move on. The same goes also for assignments, right? So look, I've approached giving assignments in graduate courses in different ways at different points over the years. There have been moments in my life when I've basically, the assignment hasn't been spelled out in very much detail, and I've just said, well, do X, Y, and Z, and we'll see how well it goes. Other points I've been kind of more specific in the kinds of direction I give people about what I expect and how I'll be evaluating the assignments that they're producing in the class. And there's pedagogical value in both ways of approaching things, right? So I'm not saying that like if a professor doesn't give you really explicit instructions on an assignment, then they're doing something wrong, because I don't think they're doing something wrong, right? There's just different models of education at the graduate level. That said, if you're unclear about what you should be doing in an assignment, or unclear about whether you're performing at the level that you should be performing at, then that's another opportunity for you to go meet with your professor, especially if it's about you, if it's about your performance on assignments that are like regular assignments, say weekly writing responses to the readings. You should definitely make an appointment to talk to the professor about that. Don't just ambush them before or after class. Don't ask them a question about that requires them to evaluate you in class. Those are perfect things to talk about in office hours, and I think any professor would welcome those opportunities. If you need clarification about how to do something for an assignment, then in class, especially the beginning of class, is a great time to ask that kind of question. I'll give you an example of I think a kind of common one. I know when I was a graduate student, my professors loved to assign a prospectus or a proposal, right? So like most of my classes, the big assignment was a full-size research paper, 25 to 30 pages. But usually there would be an assignment earlier in the semester that was a proposal or prospectus. The assignment usually was represented in the syllabus with a couple of lines of text that said, write a proposal or write a prospectus proposing your project and keep it to X number of pages or X number of words. And there oftentimes wasn't much, or at least it didn't seem like there was much description for the assignment beyond that. And I think that's probably like fairly common, right? People are told write a proposal, write a prospectus, but then not given the instruction of necessarily of what exactly that should look like. And so I think that's a great opportunity for you to say, well, I haven't written a proposal or prospectus before. What are your expectations for what that should look like, right? Because the professor probably has at least a couple of ideas in mind of what that might look like in practice, right? Because like there probably isn't one single right way to do it. but there's a couple of more productive ways to approach writing an assignment like that. And so I'm sure the professor would be happy to explicate kind of what the breakdown of that might be and what that should look like and what kinds of questions it should answer, which will give you some more guidance. If their answer in class doesn't give you enough guidance and you're still feeling a little bit lost on the assignment, then again, that's another great opportunity to email them and set up a time to meet with them in their office hours or outside of their office hours if you both can't do that. To get the guidance that you need, because you don't want to you just don't want to guess, right? You want to be able to approach these things from an informed perspective, and do it closer to right the first time than to complete something that is just really off the mark, right? And I think that's ultimately, like, to come back to the value of asking questions and the assumption that people will ask questions as kind of part of daily life in grad school. Baked into this grad school thing, right, is the assumption that people, kind of have the wherewithal and the motivation and the drive to ask for clarification and to seek ways of improving their own work, right? And so I think that and I'm sure there's exceptions that will prove the rule here. But I think for the most part, right, most professors, especially if they're graduate professors who advise students, they're eager and willing to help you in whatever way seems appropriate for the context, for the class that you're in, for your stage in your graduate career, and all that kind of stuff. So don't be afraid to ask those questions. I really think that you're going to be pleasantly surprised. Honestly, over the course of my career teaching graduate students, which is over a decade now, anytime somebody is asked a question that they've prefaced by saying, this is probably a dumb question, or I feel silly asking this question, I think every single time there has always been at least one other person, usually more than one other person in class, who's had the same question or related question, right? So don't psych yourself out of asking those important questions, even if they seem like they're things that you should know. Chances are they're not. The chances are there's a higher level of complexity involved, especially if it's related to the content of your course than you're anticipating, right? And I think that's especially true with first-gen students who have an even greater tendency to undervalue what we know and to kind of like to basically like be our own worst enemy and think that, oh well, no one else would have this question, when chances are they really probably do. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say for now. If you have questions related to what I've just said about questions, shoot me an email, reply on social media, do whatever to let me know, and I'll do my best to kind of like clarify that next time. Relatedly, if you have other strategies or other practices that you want to suggest, shoot those my way too, because I'm more than happy to kind of add those to the list. What I have to say about this stuff is rooted in my own experiences as a first generation college graduate and as a professor at a research intensive university. But there are undoubtedly many other strategies for approaching the topics that I address on this show. Finally, since I really do want to keep the show as listener-driven as possible, please send me your thoughts and questions. So hit up the show on Twitter or shoot me an email when you get a chance and a desire to, a hankering, if you will. And if you do have a question, please send it to questions@yourshadowadvisor.com or head to the website to submit an audio question that I might air on the podcast. That's it for today. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're feeling up to it, leave us a 5-star rating and a review. Thanks again for listening in. I'll be back with more next time.